Hello, I'm Razik, and today I'm presenting to a British Sign Language English interpreter.
And hello, my name is Tabassum, and I'm also going to be speaking through an interpreter.
Our topic today is deafblindness and the barriers in education and employment. So, the definition of deafblindness is not just a deaf person who cannot see or a blind person who cannot hear. The two impairments together increase the effects of each other, according to Sense. A researcher, Aitken et al. 2000, provided some excellent information. Sometimes it's very difficult for deafblind people to communicate within their environment and to access travel. The challenges to accessing information can be something as simple as they can't read a menu, they can't see a recipe, so they buy the right foods to cook. Deafblind people also, they're very interested in what's going on in the world around them, but they can't access the radio or the newspaper, so really that creates a barrier that isolates them from the general population. One really surprising statistic is that only 4% of deafblind people in the UK are actually in employment. A deputy manager, he wrote a report saying it's really terrible because staff just aren't deafblind aware and communication is really difficult. Something very negative in the workplace is that people just don't have experience of deafblindness and the variety of communication methods that people use. Some of the workplace barriers are communication, funding, qualifications. So say for example with qualification, someone who's hearing and sighted might get a GCSE. However, just this basic level of education and qualification is very challenging for a deafblind person to achieve. Some of the communication barriers are, say for example, a hearing sighted person will receive information through facial expression, body language, taking in visual cues from the person in front of them, so they understand how that person feels. But this is something that's blocked for a deafblind person. They might lose information that generally normal people just access, for example, the risk assessment, the dangers that exist within the work environment. They might be filed away in a paper copy on the shelf, and a deafblind person just hasn't got access in the method of communication that they prefer or require. Some of the funding barriers are because they've got a poor qualification, it's not easy for them to find work. So, for example, even just a cleaning job, that makes it very difficult for them to apply for, even though this might be something low paid and menial, because they just can't access the environment to see and hear, so they can't make a visual map, so they can't really do something as menial as cleaning. This means then that their wages are very low when they are in employment. Some of the barriers they need to overcome are deafblind awareness. This makes it so frustrating for them because it's so challenging to overcome this barrier and to educate people in their workplace environment so that they have access, so that they get the right equipment, for example, braille note takers, IT, specialist magnifiers, large print, hearing aids or cochlear implants that's specially linked to technology available. Also, the assistance with communication, that's another barrier that desperately needs to be overcome. It's so hard to provide and source professional communication support. The communication professionals have to be aware of different methods of communication, for example, hands-on signing, block, DeafBlind manual, Braille, Tadoma, and these are just a few. Also, another barrier is access to benefits for disabled people to get the funding they require to start out in the workplace, for example, DLA, Disability Living Allowance, or PIP, Personal Independence Payments. It's so challenging for them to just get this kind of funding just to start off on their journey into the workplace. The British government on the DWP website mentioned a number of bullet points that would help people gain access into the workplace. For example, in education, it's very important for people to have a good routine so that the same thing happens regularly at specific times. This helps a deaf-blind person to remember and function in their environment because they know exactly what order and what routine, what will happen next. Also, providing training for intervener guides or communicator guides to go with them. The deaf-blind person needs to go somewhere or is working in an employment environment, they also need to be allocated extra time. So now I'm going to hand over to Tabitha.
So I'm going to be talking about education for deaf-blind children. An article that includes a survey saying nationally there are gaps in the care for deaf-blind children. 1/3 of local authorities don't follow the guidance that is provided. The survey said 91% of local authorities haven't identified the deaf-blind child and also don't provide adequate services for them. In 2001, it said the councils in England and Wales provide either late assessment of deaf-blind children and also don't provide adequate services to meet their needs. So in school or outside school, their needs are not assessed properly and therefore the correct services are not then put in place for them. About 10% of councils don't actually ignore the need for providing specialist services for deaf-blind children. The Department for Children, Schools and Families said that the government must recognise these children and are encouraging them to assess the needs and provide adequate services within the field of education. Because for deaf-blind children, there are guidelines, but these are not being followed. Sense, a charity for deaf-blind children, said that not enough of the councils are following this guidance and are actually ignoring it. And they're not allocating adequate funding to cover this. Another article said schools are letting down deaf-blind children. Heather Gray, who is the director of the NDCS, she said that deafblind children, only about 80% of them are actually in mainstream schools, but the provision is not always adequate for them in these mainstream settings. And so they gain low qualifications because the support mechanisms are not adequate. And there is really no reason why they shouldn't attain the same as their hearing peers, but because of the support, they don't usually do this. In Scotland, the government said that for about 2,500 deaf and deafblind children, and so there are approximately 2,500 visually impaired or deaf children in Scotland and the UK, and 3,050 deaf students. So it's a significant number, but the level of support is very poor for these deafblind children. So I'm now going to talk about communication barriers in school, which are really important. As Razik said, there are several different communication methods and services that need to be provided to ensure that deafblind children have adequate access to, and can progress through the school system. Without equipment, this is very, very difficult. And also there is little provision for the different communication methods that deafblind children can use. So I'm going to talk about communication barriers, one of which is space, then we have people and time. These three things have to be taken into consideration. So as far as space is concerned for communication, in a school environment, in a classroom, space is really important. The deafblind child has to know their environment, has to know where tables and chairs are. They can't see or hear anything, but they need to be aware and be made aware of the environment in which they're in. This will ensure that communication can take place. The deafblind child can feel safe and secure. So I'm now going to talk about people. Again, in a communication environment, the school should provide adequate support, the right sort of teachers and teaching assistants and communication support professionals who can communicate clearly with the deafblind child. If none of this is provided, it means that the deafblind child can't learn, and their motivation and enthusiasm for school can be very impaired, and it can lead to them feeling very withdrawn. And it can affect the deafblind child's future when they try to go into employment. The final consideration is time. This is, again, a really vital area. If information is given very quickly, then time has to be given for the deaf-blind child to take in this information. So extra time has to be allocated to do this. This will ensure that the deaf-blind child can take in all the information and fully understand it so that they're aware of what's going on. They maybe need things explained in more detail. They may need to use other methods, such as allowing the deaf-blind child to touch different things so that they're aware of what they're going to be using. So this extra time is vital. If not enough time is allocated, then again this can lead to the deaf-blind child feeling very isolated and frustrated, and it's another barrier to their learning that is really overcomable if the adequate provision is put in place. Thank you for listening to me.